Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Test, Daf 9 of Masechta Yevamos. Friends, who can tell me what Daf 9 talks about? I don't know, what does it talk about? Well, we wrap up, we kind of wrap up this past week of this Aleh Gezerah Shaveh. So we're kind of gonna wrap that up today and then move on in the Mishnah about some more Yibumi kind of things. So that's kind of what we have in store. So let's get started over here. So we're starting Daf Chesamud Beis, about 3 lines from the bottom. V'Rebbe hay oleo my ovle. So of course Rebbe we learned yesterday. The Rebbe learns out from V'lokach, V'lokcha, V'yabim, V'yibma. That's how he learns out that the tzara is right, that when there's an erva, well, when it comes to achos isha, so then also her co-wife also would be aser in yibum. So he learns that out from likacha, v'lokach, what was it? V'lokach, v'likacha, and then v'yabim v'yibma. Anyway, so he learns it out from there. So then what does he do with the Gezerah Shaveh of aleh? Apparently he doesn't need that Gezerah Shaveh to teach me that the tzara is asur. So what does he do with alel? So Rebbe Hayaleh my ovle. So mi boile lichde, I think Tanan. Yeah. So he needs it for like we learn in the following Mishnah. What do we learn in the following Mishnah? In Chayavin Bezdin Ela al Dover Shezdonu Karis V'Shiggas Chatos. Friends, what in the world is that talking about? It's talking about Parhelim Dover Shel Tzibor. That when Bezdin rules mistakenly, they make a mistake and they rule that something is permitted that really is forbidden, and then all of Israel goes and does like their psak, does like their ruling. Basically the entire congregation, the entire nation made a mistake based on the sort of guidance of the sort of mistaken guidance of Bezdin. So they offer a korban, on account of this mistake. So there's a korban that is brought. It's called a par helim davar shel tzibur. It is a cow that is brought in the event that there was sort of an oversight for the community. So we have a Mishnah that says, a Mishnah in Horius. Also getting back to my grandfather. My grandfather, he started his Daf Yomi career learning Daf Yomi with Masechta Horius. So whenever he would come around to Masechta Horius, he would make a siyum hashas. Anyways, so in Chayavim Bezdin, Ela al davar shezdonu karis v'shigasu chatas. So this par helim davar shel tzibur, it's not talking about random stuff. It's talking about something that you're chayiv purposely karis, and by accident a korban chatas. For example, if they rule that something is mutter to do on Shabbos, that really is aser. So that's something that if you do malacha on Shabbos on purpose, you chayiv karis. If you do by accident, you chayiv korban chatas, as we know from Masechta Shabbos. So if they made a mistake in, let's say, Hilchos Shabbos, and everybody started doing like their ruling on Shabbos, and it turned out that they made a mistake, so they bring a korban par helim davar shel tzibur, they bring this cow sacrifice. And similarly, when the Kohen Gadol also makes a mistake, so I believe that he also brings a cow as well, if I'm not mistaken. Although I think actually we're gonna get to. Oh no, 1 second. We're gonna get to this in a minute. That it is a cow. Oh, we'll get there in a minute. Anyways, so him also, it's talking about if he makes a mistake with regard to something that you're chayiv intentionally karis and by accident achatos. V'lo ba'avodas kochavim, and also when it comes to the korban of avodah zarah, it has to be right. If the bezdin makes a mistake and says that something is allowed, it's not actually avodah zarah, and it turns out it is avodah zarah. So then the whole congregation ends up worshiping avodah zarah by accident because of it. So in that case, they bring a cow and a goat, I think. So also it has to be something. Right, Ela al davar shechayav nazdonu karis v'shigasu chatas, something that you're chayiv intentionally karis and by accident a korban chatas. Rashi points out Those are like the four main categories of serving avodah zarah: zibuach, v'kitur, v'nisuch, v'shtachava, slaughtering, burning, libating, and prostrating. If prostrating is bowing, right? Whatever. So that. All right, fine. What do you want me to tell you? So when it comes to par l'mdavar shel tzibur, the par kohen Mashiach, yeah, exactly, par kohen Mashiach. That's the thing, yeah. And also the korbanis for if everybody does avodah zarah by accident. So these are for things that you chayiv al zdono karis v'al shigagas uchatos. V'tnanami, we talk also in the Mishnah Dar in Horius. Kol mitzvah shebator shechayavan al zdono karis v'al shigagas uchatos. That whenever you have a mitzvah in the Torah that you chayiv intentionally, you chayiv you chayiv karis, and by accident you be chayiv a korban chatos. So yachid mevi kisba o seira. So the korban that an individual will offer in that case. So for example, if somebody by accident is machal Shabbos, so he will offer a female sheep or a female goat. Nasi. Now if this individual was the king, maybe sa'ir, he brings a goat. I guess a male goat. Moshiach uvezdin, if it is the kohen gadol, or if it is par l'mdavar shel tzibur, that kilu bezdin ruled for everybody mistakenly, mevin par, so they bring a cow. Vavodus kochavim. And when it comes to worshipping idols, getchkes, nasi u'moshiach, so the king and the kohen gadol, Yachid Nasi Mashiach, an individual, or the king, or the Kohen Gadol, Mevin Seira, so they would bring a female goat if they accidentally serve a getchke, serve a avodah zarah. Tzibor / like Bezdin, so then Mevin Par V'Sa'ir, they bring a cow and a goat. Par L'Ola V'Sa'ir L'Chatos, a cow for an Ola, and a goat for a chatos, right? So if Bezdin erroneously, maybe that's a better word, erroneously ruled that something was okay because it was not considered avodah zarah, and it turns out that itake is considered avodah zarah. So now the whole congregation ended up by accident doing worshipping avodah zarah. So then they offer a cow and a goat, a cow as an olah and a goat as a sin offering. Okie dokie. Moving on. We still haven't seen anything about Aleha yet. So we still have to figure out what Rebbe is, what he means when he says that he learns Aleha in this context. So now, go weiter. So how do we know that these korbanos are offered for things that you're chayiv intentionally karis and by accident a chatos? Titan Rabbanon, as we taught in a brisa. V'noda achatos asher chatu aleha. Oh, here you go. Aleha. That it says in the context of, it says in the context of this, of the, when the congregation does avodah zarah by accident, it says v'noda achatos asher chatu aleha. That it will be known, this sin that happened, that they accidentally, the congregation served avodah zarah. Rebbe Omer, and says Rebbe, oh no, wait, one second, no, 1 second, I'm sorry, this is by Par l'mdavar shel tzibur. Yes, I'm sorry, so that pasuk is in the context of Par l'mdavar shel tzibur, right? So again, so the Tanur Rabbanan, the Rabbi Stav, v'noda achatos asher chatu aleo, so it will be known the sin that they sinned. So Kilu, Bezdin said that something is, let's say, allowed on Shabbos. And all of Israel then did that thing on Shabbos because they thought it was permitted. And then says the pasuk, I'm going to read it again, V'noda achatos asher chatu aleh. It became known to them that they made a mistake and that everybody sinned. Rebbe Omer nemer kan oleo v'nemer l'holon oleo. And here we go. Rebbe says, well, it says here by Par l'mdavar shel tzibur oleo. And it says, of course, by Yibum Oleo. No. It says by Achos Isha Oleo. Malaholon Dover Shechayev Mazon Akaris Vashigagas Uchatos. So just like by Achos Isha, it is something that if you do it, if you sleep with your wife's sister, you're by accident, So on purpose you chayiv kares, and by accident you chayiv a korban chatos. Avkan, also when it comes to parlam davar shel tzibur, davar shechaven as dono kares v'ashigaso chatos, we are talking about something that you'd be chayiv on purpose kares, and by accident a korban chatos. That is what we're talking about. That if there was an erroneous ruling regarding regarding a halacha that you'd be chayiv on purpose kares, and by accident a korban chatos, so then that is where a part helim davar shel tzibur is in order. Fine. Ashkechon tzibur Mashiach min olam givaldig. So we learned that by helim davar shel tzibur we're talking about something that you chayiv as dono kares v'ashigaso chatos. How do I know that the same applies to the par kohen Mashiach that we're talking about, where the kohen gadol sinned erroneously, right? Sinned by accident on something that as dono kares v'ashigaso chatos. Tichsiv, the pasuk says b'Mashiach, by the kohen gadol le'ashmas ha'am. No, what does the pasuk say? Im ha-kohen ha-Mashiach yachto le'ashmas ha'am. That if the kohen gadol sins to the guilt of the nation, Mashiach kitzibur, that we're comparing the guilt of the kohen gadol le'ashmas ha'am, of the nation, that we're comparing the kohen gadol to the nation. That just like the nation, the parlam davar shel tzibur, is davar shezdono kares v'shigaso chatos, so also the par kohen Mashiach, we're talking about something that you chayav as dono kares v'shigaso chatos. Yachid v'nasi. How do we know that an individual or a king? Also, we're talking about davar shezdono kares v'shigaso chatos. Also mitzvahs. It says by the king, and it also says by an individual. Right? It says mikol mitzvahs Hashem elokav asher lo sayasena. Right? So meaning it says a similar pasuk both by the king and by an individual, and it also says by the parlam davar shel tzibur. It says kol adas yisrael yishgu v'nelam davar me'enei hakol v'asu achas mikol mitzvahs Hashem asher lo sayasena v'ashem. So it says mitzvahs by an individual, it says mitzvahs by the king, it says mitzvahs by parlam davar shel tzibur. So therefore we see that all of them are talking about davar shedono kares v'shigaso chatos. V'lo b'avodas kochavim elo davar chayav nazdono kares v'shigaso chatos. Also when it comes to idol worship, so those korbanos are also offered in the context of worshipping an idol in a way that you chayav intentionally kares and unintentionally chatos. Tzibur b'avodas kochavim yelef me'enei me'enei. So when it comes to the congregation by avodas kochavim, because we learn Agzer Shava of me'enei me'enei, that it says me'enei. What does it say? It says vaya me'enei ha'eda nesesal hashkaka, etc. That is in the context of the entire nation doing avodah zarah by accident, and also by parlam davar shel tzibur. It also says v'nelam davar me'enei hakol, so it says enei in both. So therefore, just like by parlam davar shel tzibur, we're talking about davar shechayavan as dono kares v'ashigaso chatos. So also by the congregation, the nation doing avodah zarah by accident, we're talking about davar shechayavan as dono kares v'ashigaso chatos. Yachid nasi u'mashiach. And we learn out that an individual, a king, and a kohen gadol also, we're talking about davar shechayavan as dono kares v'ashigaso chatos ve'im nefesh achas. Right? That it says ve'im, and also, right, as we're going to say in a second, vav mosif alin in rishon, that vav and is adding to the previous thing. So if you look in the Torah, first it talks about the congregation sinning by doing avodah zarah by accident, and then it says ve'im nefesh achas, and if an individual, so echad yachid ve'echad nasi ve'echad Mashiach, so an individual could be an individual, it could be a king, it could be a kohen gadol, any single person, b'mashma is included, ve'vav mosif al inyan rishon v'la mitachto min ha'elyon, and the letter vav is adding. So therefore when it says ve'im nefesh achas, and if one fellow does avodah zarah by accident, so it's adding on to the previous discussion in the Torah, which is talking about the congregation accidentally sinning by avodah zarah. And therefore, just like by the right, it says v'la mitachto min ha'elyon, and therefore we'll learn out the additional clause from the initial clause. The initial clause being that the congregation brings a korban, and that we said is talking about davar shechayev asdon kares v'ashigaso chatos. So and also when we're talking about the next clause, v'im nefesh achas, that an individual, whether it's a kohen gadol, whether it's a king, they will be chayev also when we're talking about something shechayev asdon kares ve'al shigaso chatos. So we see that is what Rebbe learns from Aleha. He uses that Gezeir Shava to teach me that in the context of Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur, we're talking about something that Yuchayev al Zdon Karis Val Shigagaso Chatos. Now, affecting Gemara V'Rabbanon, what about according to the rabbis who use Aleha to teach me about Yibum, right? To teach me about the Tzareh of your wife's sister? So then, how do they learn that by Parim Davar Shel Tzibur and also all these other examples? We're talking about Davar Shechayav and Asdon Karis V'Ashigaso Chatas. So Rabbanan Aisvarim Nalu, how do they know this? Nafkalu Midemakri Le Rabbi Yoshua Livrei. We know this based on what Rabbi Yoshua said to his son, Torah Achas Yiyeh Lochem Leose Bishgaga. That we've seen this before. We saw it in Masechta Shabbos. That Yeshua says to his son that the pasuk says in the context of Avodah Zarah, of the korban of Avodah Zarah, it says Torah Achasi Elochem. There will be one Torah, one law for everybody. Laose b'shgaga, for somebody who does Avodah Zarah by accident. V'anefesh asher taisa biad rama, and then it continues and says, and if somebody does it on purpose, then you'll get karis. So what do we see? So we see again, so it says Torah achas yelachim laose b'shgaga, right? For something that if you do by accident, v'anefesh asher taisa biad rama, and then we also talk about, and right, the pasuk says that v'anefesh asher taisa biad rama min ezuch min hager es Hashem u'megadeh v'nichrus ha'nefesh ahim mikayavama, that they'll get karis. So we see we're talking about something that, right? We're talking about Avodah Zarah. We're talking about something that you chayiv al shigaso chatos ve'alzdono karis. Huksha kol haTorah kula lavodas kuchavim, and it says Torah achas. It'll be one law for everybody. And says Rabbi Yoshua, you see, Torah achas, we're comparing the entire Torah to this halacha, to the halacha of Avodah Zarah. Ma'avodas kuchavim davar shechayav and alzdono karis v'ashigaso chatos. And just like in the context of Avodah Zarah, we're talking about something that Yechayev al Zdono Karis V'Ashigaso Chatas. Av Kol Davar Shechayav al Zdono Karis V'Ashigaso Chatas. And therefore, we're talking about all other situations as well, right? A fellow by accident is Michal Shabbos, so also we're talking about something that Yechayev al Zdono Karis V'Ashigaso Chatas, because we compare everything to Avodah Zarah. Now, Ashkechon Yochid V'Nosi U'Mashiach. Fine. So this is all fine and good for an individual, right? Right? We said by Avodah Zarah, we said by Nefesh Asher Taisa Biad Rama, right? We talk about right Torah Achas Yalachem lo. Right? We said Lager. What did it say? Ha'ezrach b'Bnei Yisrael v'Lager gar b'Sochem Torah Achas Yalachem. Right? We're talking about individuals over here. And we're saying that by Avodah Zarah, we're talking about something that Yechayev al Zdon Karis v'Ashigaso Chatas, and we say Torah Achas, and therefore we compare it to also Averas in general. If it's, right, you Yechayev a Korban Chatas, if it's something that Yechayev al Zdon Karis v'Ashigaso Chatas, okay, fine. So says the Gemara, Ashkechon Yachid. So this is all fine and good in the individual context. We compare it to Avodah Zarah, and we're saying that it's Davar Shezdon Karis v'Ashigaso Chatas. V'Nasi, so Ashkechon Yachid V'Nasi Mashiach. Fine, so that works for an individual, for a king, for a kohen gadol, bein b'avodas kochavim, bein b'shar mitzvahs, whether it's avodas kochavim, whether it's by other mitzvahs that we learn out from avodas kochavim. Tzibur b'avodas kochavim minayin. How do I know that when it comes to avodah zarah, the congregation also, we're talking about something that Yechayev al Zdon Karis v'Ashigaso Chatas? So Mikra v'im nefesh. Well, just like we said earlier, well, the pasuk says v'im nefesh, that kilu right after discussing a congregation, if the entire nation does avodah zarah, we then talk about v'im nefesh achas, that if an individual does avodah zarah, and it's there in the context of the individual that we say that we're talking about something that Yechayev al Zdon Karis v'Ashigaso Chatas v'lamid elyu mitachton, and we'll say that the vav serves as a connector between the congregation which was discussed first, and the individual that was discussed afterwards, and the vav serves as a connection to teach Vilamid Elyo Mitachton, and we learned the first clause, i.e., the congregation sinning by Avodah Zarah Mitachton, from the fact that it says in the Torah by an individual that we're talking about, i.e., to say that all of it, whether it's the congregation, whether it's an individual, we're talking about someone that Yechayev Ashigaso Azdono Karis Vashigaso Chatas. So Elet Tzibur B'Shar Mitzvahs Minolim. And then how do we know? Okay, fine. So far we know an individual by Avodah Zarah. We know an individual by other mitzvahs because we say Torah Achas, it's all compared. We know a congregation by Avodah Zarah because that Vav connects the congregation and the individuals. The only missing piece now is Elet Tzibur B'Shar Mitzvahs Minolim. How do we know the congregation when it comes to other mitzvahs that are not Avodah Zarah? Yolef Me'ene Me'ene. Well, it says Me'ene in the context of a Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur. It says Me'ene in the context of the congregation doing Avodah Zarah by accident. So just like over by the Avodah Zarah, we're talking about Davar Shezdono Karis V'Shigaso Chatos. So right, so just like by the Avodah Zarah, we're talking about that. So also by the congregation that sins has to bring a Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur, we're talking about Davar Shechav Nazdono Karis V'Shigaso Chatos. And now the Gemara asks, "V'Rebbe I Torah Achas Mayovedle." Oh, so then what does Rebbe do with this Torah Achas thing, right? We just explained the Torah Achas means that we compare everything to Avodah Zarah to say that we're talking about Davar Shezidono Karis V'Shechayoven Azdono Karis V'Ashigaso Chatos. What does Rebbe do with Torah Achas? So miboyle lichdetanya. So we need it for the following brayso lefishmatzinu, because we found shechilek akosuf ben yichidim nemerubim, that when it comes to Avodah Zarah, we distinguish between individuals and non-individuals. That's amazing. Non-individuals. I love it. Non-individuals. I love that. I love that. I really love that. Because we're looking for something that isn't an individual, but also isn't like the entire congregation, more like a city or something. Non-individuals. I love that. Non-individuals. Is that like an actual thing? Is there something called Probably not, right? I hope not. Because I feel like I want this to be something that I made up and is really funny. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? Non-individuals. Alright, but the fact of the matter is we're talking about like a city, you know? So the Rebbe, I love it. Non-individuals. Amazing. The Rebbe, hi Torah Achas, my overlay. So what does he do with Torah Achas? So mibayla lichdetanya. He requires it for the following brayso lefishmatzinu shechilek akosu ben yichidim lemrubim. So because we see by Avodah Zarah there's an afkamine between an individual who worships a getchke and an entire city that worships a getchke, but not the entire community, right? Talking about meaning not the entire Israel, but we're talking about a city. Fine. So the fisha matzinu shechilek akazu ben yichidim lemrubim yichidim beskila, that an individual who worships Avodah Zarah and he's warned and all that whole thing, so we stone him. Lefichach mamon and palit. Now, because he gets such an extreme, such a severe punishment of stoning, which according to the rabbis is the most severe of all the punishments. Of course, we learned at the very beginning of the Gemara on Daf Beis that according to Reb Shimon, he says that Sreifa is the most severe punishment, but the rabbis say that stoning is the most severe punishment. What do you want me to tell you? Let's go weiter. So the fichach mamon and palet, because they have the most severe death. Oof, that sounds rough. So therefore, their money is spared because they had such a difficult death. So at least they get to keep their money, I guess. Merubim b'sayif. Now, if the entire in irani dachas, right, if an entire city sins, so we cut off their heads. Oh, lefichach mamon and ovid. But because sayif is, I believe according to the rabbis, I think sayif is the second to lowest severity misas bezdin. Right? It goes skila sreifa cherev vehereg vechenek, that cutting off somebody's head is the second to least severe. So therefore, because the death is least severe, we destroy the financial assets as well. Therefore, we destroy their money. Yachol nachlo b'korban osein. So I might think that, well, if their deaths are different and the way that we treat their property is different, so maybe also the korbanis, when they do it by accident, would be different. That if an individual does avodah zarah by accident, what did we say? That he brings what did we say? Yachid mevin seira, a female goat. So I might think that an individual brings a female goat, but the city would do something else. Of course, if the entire congregation were to accidentally serve avodah zarah, so then they would bring a cow and I think we said a female goat earlier. So, a male goat. Okay, a cow and a male goat. Okay, so by an individual who accidentally serves a getchke, so he brings a female goat. An entire nation that accidentally serves a getchke, so they bring a cow and a male goat. Now the question is, what about a city? So I may have thought to say that the city is different than the individual, just like an individual gets stoned and a city gets heads cut off, and right, there's differences for the money as well. So I may have thought that there's a difference between the korban of an individual and the korban of a city. Therefore, says Rebbe, the pasuk says that it'll be one Torah, one set of laws for everybody, i.e., everybody brings the same korban. An individual, a city, the halacha will be that whether it's an individual or whether it's the individuals in a city, right? Meaning, as opposed to when the entire nation sins, so there's one cow and one goat that's offered for everybody. The city, however, is considered like a bunch of individuals, and each individual would offer a female goat. Okie dokie. It says Torah achas, that everybody, whether it's an individual, whether it's a city, they bring a female goat. Maskefler of Chilkia Meagronia. And now Chilkia Meagronia asks the following question: Time the cost of Achmana Torah achas elochem. Asks of Chilkia Meagronia, are you seriously positing that the reason why I know that the korban for an individual and the korban for a city is the same, a female goat? I know that because the pasuk says Torah achasi elochem halavachi, but if the pasuk would not have said Torah achasi elochem havamina nechalek, I would say that there is a different korban that they would bring. My laisu. What different korban can the people of the city possibly bring? Laisu par. What are they going to bring? A cow? Tzibur b'shar mitzvah sudu maisu. A cow is what is the korban of a par helam davar shel tzibur, not the korban of a city that sins. Sin City. Where's that? Was that? Somebody told me that's Bangkok. Is that Bangkok? Friends, we learned Babylon Talmud in Bangkok. It was like the second or third week. It's like the second week of Babylon Talmud. I remember I was in Bangkok on a Motzei Shabbos, and that's when Rachel Pear asked me a question. That was my first time meeting Rachel Pear. I was in Bangkok on a Motzei Shabbos, and she was asking a question, I think about Daf Yudal of Masechta Brachos, if I'm not mistaken. So par tzibur. So where am I? Where am I? Lesi par. So tzibur b'shar mitzvos demaisu. A cow is a par, the korban of a par lam davar shel tzibur. Kisba. What are they going to offer? A female sheep. Yachid b'shar mitzvos demaisu. That's the korban of a that's a korban chatas, is a sheep. Not this. That's not the korban of a city that sins. A sin city. Seir, nasi. I mean, seir. If we're going to say bring a goat, well, nasi b'shar mitzvah sudemaisi. That's the korban of a king when he sins by by other mitzvahs, not avodah zarah. Par l'olah v'sar l'chatas. Should we suggest that they should bring a cow for an olah and a goat for a chatas? Tzibur b'avodas kochavim udemaisi. That is the korban of when the entire congregation sins by avodah zarah by accident. That's what they bring. So kilu, says, so asks of Chilke Me'agronia, like, it's very nice to say that we say Torah Achas to teach me that an individual or a city both have the same korban, which is a female goat. But the fact of the matter is that it's not necessary, because even if it would not say Torah Achas, I really don't have any other option, because any other option would be some other korban, whether it's a parlim davar shel tzibur or a korban chatas of a yachid or whatever it might be. There isn't really any other option that we could say that this city would bring as their korban. So ve'elamai seira yachid. Wait, where am I? So ve'elamai seira yachid nami hainu korbanu. Right, so ve'elamai seira yachid nami hainu korbanu. So therefore, what? The only other option that you have is a she goat, right? A female goat, which of course is the same korban as an individual. So ke'ilu, I don't need the pasuk to tell me Torah achas elachim in order to tell me that an individual and the people in the city would bring a she goat if they do avodah zarah by accident. I kind of just would know that on my own by process of elimination from the fact that there is no other option for them to bring. The only option is a she goat, which is ultimately the same thing as an individual. So itzrich. So the Gemara says, no, I do in fact need the pasuk to say Torah achas, because Sakadate Chamina, I may have thought to say, since when it comes to the congregation, if the entire nation by accident sins and does avodah zarah based on the ruling of the erroneous ruling of Bezdin, so they offer a cow for an olah and a goat for a chatos, inunami nesu ipcha. So maybe I would have thought, okay, so when it's a city but not the entire congregation, maybe they also bring a cow and a goat, but the opposite, a cow as a chatas and a goat as an olah. So maybe I would have thought that, inami tzarich ben lo takana. Or else, maybe I could have thought to say that, well, yes, technically if I'm just talking about process of elimination without Torah achas yelachim, so I might think that, well, yeah, there is no other option for them to bring, right? They can't bring like a cow because that's the parlim davar shel tzibur kilu. There is no other option, and they're basically just stuck. So therefore, kamash malan, that's why I need the pasuk to say, no, they're not stuck. Torah achas yelachim. It's the same halacha for an individual as it is for the people of a city who accidentally sin, which is that they offer a female goat as a korban chatas. Alright, friends, so with that we basically wrap up kind of the whole aleha kind of vibes. And now we're going to go weiter in the Mishnah. Friends, we got to put on our Yevamos hat again, a shtickle. You ready to put on your Yevamos hat, a shtickle? Here we go. So, Amle Levi Rebbe. So, kind of moving on in our discussion of the Mishnah. So, Levi says to Rebbe, alright, what does he say? My irya ditani tesvav lesni tezain. Okay. Levi suggests to Rebbe, why list the number 15 in the Mishnah? List 16. That there are 16 arayas that are forbidden. So, Omar le, kimedumali, shein lamoach b'kod kodo. And Rebbe says, what is going on with Levi? It seems that he doesn't have a brain in his head. My daitech. Rebbe says to Levi, what in the world? What's the 16th one? Imo anusas aviv. Are we talking about his mother who was raped by his father? Imo anusas aviv plukta to Rebbe Yehuda v'Rabbanani, uve plukta lo kamari. His mother who was raped by his father is actually a machlokas that we saw earlier in the Gemara between Rebbe Yehuda and the Rabbanon, that the Rabbanon say it's allowed, and Rebbe Yehuda says that it is not allowed. Friends, what in the world are we talking about? So, we saw a machlokas a few days ago. The question is if you have Yaakov. Yaakov raped Sarah. Okay. So now, the question is, now they're not married, can Yaakov's son Ruvain marry Sarah, who was raped by Yaakov? So the answer, so it's machokas l'maisa. The rabbis say yes. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Now, how does that apply to erva? What would be the erva tweak on this? Well, what if when Yaakov raped Sarah, so they had a baby, Shimon. Okay, and then Shimon's brother Reuven then marries Shimon's mother, who was raped by Yaakov, right? So Yaakov raped Sarah. They had a baby, Shimon. Shimon's friends. This sounds like a dysfunctional family. If I could at least, anyways, whatever it is in this situation. Well, Tori v'lomod ani tzarich. What do you want me to tell you? So in this situation, so you have Yaakov raped Sarah. They gave birth to Shimon. Reuven then ends up marrying Sarah. Reuven dies. So now what happens? There's no kids. So guess who has to do Yibum? Shimon. But Shimon is not going to do Yibum with his mom. So that's the 16th case. But, right, so Rebbe suggests maybe that's the 16th case, but the fact of the matter is it's machlokas if Reuven would be able to marry Sarah. The rabbis say yes, but Rabbi Yehuda says no. And says Rebbe, we're not talking about machlokases over here. We're only listing cases that there's no questions about. So again, so Levi says to Rebbe, my area, the Tani Tezvav, listening Tez Zayin. Why mention 15 in the Mishnah? Mention 16. Amalei. Rebbe says, Kimudumali she'ein lo moach b'kol kodo. He says, it seems like Levi doesn't have a brain in his head. Dr. Seuss, of course, says you have brains in your head and you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. Akoponim. So my daite. So Rebbe says to Levi, he says, what's the 16th one? Ima anusas aviv. Are you talking about that if are we talking about when Reuven is married to Shimon's mother who was raped by his father? Oh my gosh, that sounds like a mess. But Ima anusas aviv plukta de Rebbe Yehuda v'Rabbanani. Whether this case could actually happen is a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. The rabbis say, yeah, it could happen, but Rabbi Yehuda says it can't because it would be also for Reuven to marry Sarah in this case. Okay. And our Mishnah is not talking about machloksin. Velo, but the Mishnah is not talking about any machlokases. Veha, varei, isur mitzvah ve'isur kedusha. But what about situations where in the context of Yibum, it would be like something that is Osir Midrabanan. Right? If there's a situation where somebody is not allowed to be married like Dirabanan, or other kinds of things like a mamzer or something like that. So in those cases, the Pligi Rabbi Akiva v'Rabban, there's a question if you need to do chalitza or not in those cases. So vikatane, and yet it's taught in a Mishnah. So answer the Gemara, bepirkin communon. Rabbi saying in the first parak, in this parak, we're only talking about situations that don't have a machlokas. That other situation with these mitzvahs and kedushas, those are talking right. That's a different parak. Fine. But 1 second, there's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel of whether the tzara is in fact also or not. Of course, our Mishnah said that potros tzarosein v'tzaros tzarosein, but apparently Beis Shammai would disagree and say that the tzaros would do yibum. So that seems to be a machlokas. Beis Shammai b'makom Beis Hillel eino Mishnah. Of course, we know. Then we have a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So eino Mishnah, right? Beis Shammai, right? Beis Shammai's opinion is essentially, for all intents and purposes, as far as it's as it doesn't exist. So therefore, it's this whole question about whether a tzara is shaykh to yibum or not is irrelevant, because we go like Beis Hillel, and that's that, which is that the tzara is pater from yibum. In fact, the Gemara barei eishes achiv shlohoy be'olamo, the pligi Reb Shimon v'Rabbanon. What about the situation of eishes achiv shlohoy be'olamo? Friends, what's that talking about? It's talking about Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. It's talking about the wife of your brother who died before you were born. So, if you have Reuven and Shimon, Reuven is married to Sarah, and then Reuven dies. So then Shimon so then Shimon marries Sarah in the context of Yibum, and then Levi is born, and then Shimon dies. So now Levi technically would do Yibum with Sarah, right? Sarah was initially married to Reuven. Reuven died, she then married through Yibum Shimon. Shimon died, so now she would go to Levi, but the thing is, when Levi was born, Reuven was already dead. And that makes Sarah the wife of his brother who died before he was born, and that is not okay in the context of Yibum, and therefore Sarah just becomes treated as the wife of his brother, and therefore it's asura as an erva. But the thing is, Reb Shimon actually argues and says that in this case, it would not be an erva. That since at the time that let's just say this. Reb Shimon would say that the case of Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo, that this case of when Reuven dies before Levi was born, Levi would still do Yibum with Sarah, or at least do a Chalitza. Fine. No, so we see that when it comes to Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo, so Eishes Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo, so in that case, that's a machlokas. The rabbis say that it's an erva, that Levi does not do Yibum with Sarah. Reb Shimon argues and says that he would at least do Chalitza. V'katone, and of course that's, I think, what was it, the second to last clause in our Mishnah. So that seems to be a machlokas. So answer the Gemara, Benolarul Vasof Yibem Lo Palag Reb Shimon. That actually, when he was born and then the Yibum happened, Reb Shimon would agree that they would not do Yibum, that it would be considered an erva, and therefore there is a case when Reb Shimon and the rabbis actually agree, and that's what the Mishnah is talking about. What does that mean? Well, it means the following case. Reb Shimon would agree that, so Reuven and Shimon are alive, Levi is not born yet. Reuven marries Sarah. Reuven then dies. Now Sarah needs to do Yibum with Shimon. Sarah has not yet done Yibum with Shimon, and Levi is born. At the time that Levi is born, you have Sarah who needs to do Yibum. There's now two candidates, Shimon and Levi. Well, at the time that Levi was born, Reuven was already dead, making Sarah, who's now a free agent, usher to Levi in the context of Yibum as a Eishes Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo, that Sarah was married to Reuven, who's no longer alive, and therefore Reb Shimon would agree in that case that since at the time that Levi was born, Sarah was not yet married to Shimon in the context of Yibum, Sarah is usher to Levi, because at that point Sarah is considered the widow of Reuven, who's no longer alive. Therefore, Levi is usher to Sarah. Reb Shimon would agree in that case that would be an erva and not shaykh to Yibum or Chalitza. And that is what our Mishnah is talking about when it's talking about Eishes Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo. It's that case where everyone agrees. However, if Reuven dies and then Sarah marries Shimon, which means, through Yibum, and then Levi is born, which means that at the time that Levi was born, Shimon was already married to Sarah, i.e. Sarah was the wife now of Shimon, who does overlap with Levi. Well, then if Shimon dies, Reb Shimon would, Shimon and Reb Shimon. So if Shimon dies, then Reb Shimon would say that Levi would do Yibum with Sarah, since Sarah is the wife of Shimon, who Levi did overlap with. So in that case, Reb Shimon would argue with the rabbis, but in the case of where Sarah died before Levi was born, so Reb Shimon would agree that Levi would not do Yibum because it would be Eishes Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo. So therefore, in that case, everybody agrees. Ve'amar Reb Oshaya Chalakai Reb Shimon Af Barishona. But doesn't Reb Oshaya say that no? Reb Shimon agrees in all cases and says that Eishes Achiv Shel Hayba Olamo isn't an erva and they would do Chalitza. So Hayitosiv Reb Oshaya. But Reb Oshaya, they asked a kasha on Rabbi. He was rejected, and therefore we say that in the case of when Levi was born before Sarah married Shimon, everybody would agree that Levi would be asur to Sarah even if Shimon dies. But the Gemara asks, "V'amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav," but doesn't Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav? V'cheintani Reb Chia, and also Reb Chia taught, "B'chulon ani kore," with all of the arayis I will say, ani kore b'hen I will say, "Hasur loze muteres loze, v'asur loze muteres loze, v'achosa sheyivimta choletzes o misyabemes." Oh, friends, anybody want to take a stab at it? Anybody want to try to guess what this means? It means the following: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Here we go. So obviously they're all brothers. Now, Reuven is married to Sarah. Shimon is married to Rivka. Now, Sarah and Rivka are sisters. Okay, fine. Reuven and Shimon are in a tragic car accident. And are in a tragic car accident. And they both die at the same time. So now and they don't have kids. So now you have Sarah and Rivka, who are essentially like Yibum candidates. The thing is, you can't actually do Yibum because it's not like we say, well, Sarah will just marry Levi and Rivka will marry Yehuda. No, it doesn't work like that. Rather, it works, we say, well, Sarah and Rivka are both essentially candidates for Yibum with one of the brothers, right? Vis-a-vis Levi, let's say, you have Sarah and Rivka who are possible Yibum candidates. And the thing is that, right, so again, we don't say that, well, we'll just say that Levi gets, Levi marries Sarah and Yehuda marries Rivka. It doesn't work like that. Legabe Levi, from the perspective of Levi, both Sarah and Rivka are you can do Yibum with. The thing is that you can't actually do Yibum with Sarah or Rivka because Sarah and Rivka are sisters. So if you do Yibum, if you can't, and the fact that you have to do Yibum, it creates what's called a Zika. Sort of like, it's like a quasi, marriage state between them. The fact that Yibum needs to happen, they're connected until they do Chalitza, or if they do Yibum, and then it's like they're married. But therefore, let's say Levi would be unable to do, Yibum with Sarah, because by doing Yibum with Sarah, he's basically marrying Rivka's sister, who he's already quasi married to, and therefore there's no Yibum at all, right? Because since you're unable to do Yibum, so in this case you would do Chalitza. So in this case you do Chalitza, you wouldn't do Yibum, because by doing Yibum, you would basically be like marrying your wife's sister, essentially, because you have some kind of a connection to both of them. So you do Chalitza, you don't do Yibum. Now, what happens, though, if they are an erva? So let's say, so Reuven's married to Sarah, Shimon's married to Rivka, but now Sarah is Levi's mother-in-law, and Rivka is Yehuda's mother-in-law. So now, when Reuven and Shimon die, so, right, we said that Sarah is Levi's mother-in-law, so then obvious, right, Yibum is irrelevant. But Rivka, it doesn't have any, there's no reason, there's nothing stopping Rivka from doing Yibum with Levi, and Rivka is Yehuda's mother-in-law, so Rivka isn't relevant for Yibum, but, Sarah, there's no reason why Sarah can't do Yibum with, I don't know what I said, but Yehuda, right? So in that case, right, if each one has, right, an erva towards one of them, so then the other one can marry the other one, right? So again, if there's an erva between Sarah and Levi, and there's an erva between Rivka and Yehuda, well then, in that case, so Rivka would do Yibum with Levi, and Sarah would do Yibum with Yehuda. So now let's read that back inside. So V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav says, reviewed in the name of Rav, V'cheintani Reb Chia, and also Reb Chia B'chulon, by all of these arayas, ani kori boyin, I'll say, Ha'asura laze mutaris laze. That in our example, if Sarah was an erva with Levi, well, she can always do Yibum with Yehuda. V'asura laze mutaris laze. And Rivka, who is an erva with Yehuda, can do Yibum with Levi. V'achosa sheyivimta choletzes o misyabemes. And the one who's permitted, so Sarah vis-a-vis Yehuda does either chalitza or Yibum, and Rivka vis-a-vis Levi does either chalitza or Yibum. Rabbi Yehuda metarge michamoso ve'elach. Rabbi Yehuda slightly disagrees with how Rav learns it. Instead, right, the first 6 clauses, right? There are 6 clauses in the Mishnah up until chamoso. So Rav Yehuda metarge michamoso ve'elach. Rav Yehuda says only the arayos from his mother-in-law and on are the arayos that we are taking into account here. Aval shisa bave de reisha, but the first 6 that are essentially related to his daughter, lo mati. Would not be relevant here. My time, how come? Kevin debito beonsin mishkachasla. Well, the only way that you would be able to have this situation would be if we're talking about his daughter through rape and benisuin lo mishkachasla, but not through marriage. Benisuin kamari beonsin lo kamari. We're talking about this case is only talking about marriage. It's not talking about rape. Meaning, if we would say that Ruvain is married to Sarah, Shimon is married to Rivka. Ruvain and Shimon now die, and then Sarah and Rivka are now shaykh for Yibum to Levi and Yehuda. And we're saying that Sarah is a erva with Levi, and Rivka is an erva with Shimon. So if we're saying what kind of erva, Sarah is Yehuda's daughter. Or let's say this, Sarah is Levi's daughter, and Rivka is Yehuda's daughter, right? And that's the erva link between them. But the thing is, they're also sisters. We said that they're sisters, and it would be impossible for Sarah to be Levi's daughter, and for Rivka to be Shimon's, Yehuda's daughter, and for them to be sisters, because that would mean that if we're talking about marriage, at least, that would mean that Levi and Yehuda were married to the same woman, which can't be, because you can't marry your brother's wife. The only way for this to make sense would be if basically Levi raped somebody, and then raped a woman, and then she gave birth to Sarah. And then Yehuda raped the same woman, and she gave birth to Rivka, which would make Sarah and Rivka sisters, and also, the daughter of Shimon and of Yehuda, Levi and Yehuda, so the only way that we would have a situation of Rivka being an erva with Levi, and Sarah being an erva with Levi, and Rivka being an erva with Yehuda, and also be sisters, and also be the daughters, for that erva to be sort of the daughter. So the only way that could be possible would be if they have the same mother, of course, but that it came through rape and not through marriage. And we're only talking about through marriage here. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says that only from his mother-in-law and on is the arayos that we're talking about in this context of Reuven, Shimon, Levi and Yehuda, and Sarah and Rivka. Ve'abaye metargem af bito me'anusaso. Abaye doesn't have a problem with the way that Rav learns it. That we're even talking about his the erva being Levi and Yehuda's daughters. And even though that means that the only way for this to be possible would be through rape, since the fact of the matter is, we are able to resolve, this query, are able to kind of draw up this case where it takes place, i.e., that they could be daughters through rape. So, iboya mina onsin tehave, iboya mina nisuin tehave. Look, whether it's going to be through rape, whether it's going to be through marriage, it really doesn't make a difference in this context. We could still kind of figure out how this case could apply to all of those situations. Avol Eishes Achiv Shlo Haya Be'olamo Lo. However, says Abaye, he draws the line by Eishes Achiv Shlo Haya Be'olamo that in that case, we would not apply this to the situation of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. My timer, how come? Kevin to Reb Shimon who the mishkachas la, the Rabbanon lo mishkachas la, the plugta lo kamari. That since that could only make sense according to Reb Shimon, it cannot make sense according to the Rabbanon. Therefore, it's a machlokes, and we're not talking about machloksin in this case with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and Sarah and Rivka. Honestly, I don't think that I'm. I don't know, friends. Should I explain? Dude, this case is ridiculous. This case is absolutely ridiculous. Well, let's just start by saying this. Eishes Achiv Shahaya Ba'olamo in this context with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and ultimately you're going to have to bring into the case Yisachar and Zvulun as well, and Sarah and Rivka. You could really only find that according to Reb Shimon, who says that when it comes to Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, Reb Shimon only says that it's permitted when Shimon already married, let's say Sarah, right? Kilu, right? We had said earlier that if Reuven was married to Sarah, and then Reuven dies, then Shimon does Yibum with Sarah, and then Levi is born. So in that case, Reb Shimon would say that Levi at least does Chalitza with Sarah. However, if Shimon dies. However, if when Levi was born, Sarah had not yet done Yibum with Shimon, so then that means that when Levi was born, there was still Sarah, who was the widow of Reuven, who died and did not yet marry Shimon. In that case, Reb Shimon would say that wait, what did I say a second ago? Well, okay, in that case, basically it would be, basically it would be an erva, right? In that case, it would be in erva, right? So now, according to Reb Shimon, basically only according to Reb Shimon can you work out this case where you can have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and also ultimately Yisachar and Zvulun, who are born after Reuven and Shimon die, where you can have Sarah being mutter to Yisachar and Rivka being mutter to Zvulun. But according to the rabbis who say that all cases of Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo are asur, so then you can't work out a situation where you'll have Sarah is able to get married to Yisachar and Rivka can get married to Zvulun, but not the other way around. You won't have that according to the rabbis, because they say every case of Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo is asur. Yeah, I don't think I'm actually going to try to explain this. I think 99% of us, including myself, will get lost. It's just an insane case. I think the best way for you to work it out is probably not for me to explain it. It's probably for you to just kind of read it in the art scroll or some other place or some diagram, because it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. People being born and dying, and when did they get married? At what point? And is it Reuven? Is it Shimon? Is it Levi? Is it Yisachar? Is it Zvulun? Is it Sarah? Is it Rivka? Who's related to who? Friends, it's insanity. I advise that if you want to piece it together, take the time and figure it out on your own. I think if I explain it, everyone will get confused, including myself. Suffice it to say that this case can only work out according to Reb Shimon, who says that in some cases, Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo is asur, yet in other cases it's mutter, as opposed to the rabbis who say that all cases of Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo is always going to be asur, in which case it's impossible to have a situation where Sarah would be mutter to Yisachar but not to Zvulun, and Rivka vice versa. Fine. Now, Rav Safar Matagim Af Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo Umishkachas Lo B'Shisa Achim And Rav Safra says, no, even the case of Eishes Achiv Shlohai Ba'olamo, you can apply to this teaching of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, and Sarah, and Rivke, B'shis Mishkachas, and B'shisa Achim, exactly as I was kind of alluding to a minute ago, that we find it in a situation with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun, V'alibud Reb Shimon, and specifically according to Reb Shimon, who says that there are certain cases when it's allowed and certain cases when it's not allowed. V'simonach meisnolad v'yabim, and sort of the key to, or sort of, I don't know, some way, if it helps to some degree of understanding this very complicated situation, is that basically, let's say Ruvain died, right? Meisnolad v'yabim, that basically Ruvain dies, Yisachar is born, and then Shimon does Yibum, and then Shimon dies, and then Zvulun is born, and then, no, you see, I already messed it up. You see, that's why I'm not even getting started. I already messed it up. That Ruvain dies, Yisachar is born, Levi does does Yibum, and then Shimon dies, Zvulun is born, and then Yehuda does Yibum. In that case, you can have a situation where Yisachar would be osir to Sareh, but would be mutter to Rivka, because at the time that Rivka died, because at the time that Yisachar was born, Rivka was still married to Shimon, and then Zvulun would be mutter to Sareh, because at the time that Zvulun was born, Sareh was already married to Levi, but would be osir to Rivka, because at the time that he was born, Rivka was not yet married to Yehuda. Anyways, that's what it's talking about. So what do we see? So we see that according to Rav Safra, at least, we can apply these situations to when there is a machlokas. And in this, right, and we're talking about how to explain, our Mishnah, right? That all of these cases in our Mishnah would apply to this case of Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. So we see that in explaining our Mishnah, essentially, we're introducing machlokas according to Rav Safra. So but Rebbe doesn't hold of all of these rules that the Reb Chia is talking about, and therefore, when Rebbe responds to Levi and he says, how are you going to have a 16th case? What's the 16th case? Is it going to be that it's his mother who was raped by his father and married to his brother? That case, right? We said some machlokas of Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, and we don't include any machlokas in. And even though there's that brisa where Rav Safra seems to be saying that there is machlokas, nonetheless, Rebbe doesn't hold of that. Friends, that was the Daf Tes of Masechta Yevamos. Okay, what did we talk about today? So we started off by saying, where does Rebbe, what does he do with the Gzer Shava of Alea? Because he learns out Sarah from V'lokach V'lukocha V'yabim V'yibma. So we said that, what he does with the Alea is to teach that by a Paralim Davar Shal Tzibur, we're talking about something that Yuchayev as Dono Karis V'Ashigaso Chatos. The rabbis learned that out from Torah Achas Yelochem, and then Rebbe learns out from Torah Achas Yelochem that it's talking about that the korbanos are the same for an individual and for the people of the city that do avodah zarah by accident. And then we get into this intricate yibum kind of stuff about the suggestion that maybe there is a 16th case of erva. Rebbe says the only way to find that case would be through machlokas, and we're not going to include machlokas over here. And then we sort of had intricate cases to suggest that maybe we do have machlokas, but we, while we ultimately did find a case where an argument that there's machlokas, but Rebbe doesn't hold of that kind of brisa or argument. So that's that, friends. That was Daf Ches of Masechta, or was it Daf Tes? That was Daf Tes of Masechta Yevamos. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.